Some promises are so faithful that even time cannot convince them to leave. Every morning, just before the first rays of sunlight reach the tall pine trees surrounding the abandoned forest ranger station, a German shepherd quietly walks out of the forest and sits in exactly the same place. He faces the weathered wooden door without barking, without scratching, without making a sound. His ears remain alert, his amber eyes fixed upon the faded entrance as though he expects someone to open it at any moment. Local hikers have watched this silent ritual for years. Some leave fresh water beside the stone steps. Others bring dog food, hoping the loyal visitor will finally choose a new home. The German shepherd always accepts their kindness with gentle gratitude, yet when the sun begins setting behind the mountains, he calmly disappears back into the forest alone, only to return again the following morning at precisely the same hour. Nobody knows where he sleeps. Nobody knows who he belongs to. The old ranger station itself has remained locked for many years, surrounded by weathered split-rail fencing, towering cedar trees, and climbing ivy slowly reclaiming the building one season at a time. The faded green paint has begun peeling away from the wooden walls. Moss grows across the stone foundation. The American flagpole standing beside the entrance has long since become empty, swaying gently whenever cool mountain winds drift through the valley. Yet despite the passing years, the German shepherd never changes his routine. Rain falls across the mountains. He waits. Fresh snow blankets the trail. He waits. Bright summer mornings fill the forest with birdsong. He waits. Autumn leaves gather around the porch in golden waves. He waits. His patience is so complete that it almost seems impossible. One crisp September morning, a retired United States Army veteran named Daniel Carter arrives at the nearby trailhead carrying a well-worn backpack and a walking stick polished smooth by years of hiking. Since leaving military service, Daniel often chooses quiet mountain trails over crowded places. The peaceful rhythm of nature has become his way of finding balance after years spent, living according to schedules, missions, and responsibilities. As he follows the winding forest path toward the old ranger station, the cool air carries the fresh scent of pine needles, damp earth, and distant waterfalls echoing softly through the trees. Sunlight filters gently between towering evergreens, painting shifting patterns across the trail beneath his boots. When Daniel first notices the German shepherd sitting perfectly still before the locked station, he naturally assumes someone must be hiking nearby. He slows his pace and quietly looks around the clearing. No vehicles are parked beside the gravel access road. No voices drift through the forest. No footsteps break the peaceful silence. Only the dog remains, sitting with remarkable discipline while watching the old wooden door. Daniel approaches slowly, careful not to disturb him. "Morning, buddy," he says with a warm smile. The German shepherd briefly turns his head. His intelligent eyes meet Daniel's for only a moment before calmly returning to the door. There is no fear, no excitement, no request for food or attention, only quiet determination. Daniel kneels several feet away, noticing the dog's thick black and tan coat is clean and well cared for despite living outdoors. Around his neck rests a faded leather collar, worn smooth by countless seasons, but no identification tag remains attached. Daniel quietly places a bowl of fresh water near the porch before continuing his hike. Yet several hours later, when he returns along the same trail, the German shepherd is still sitting exactly where he had been that morning, facing the same locked door beneath the same silent forest, waiting with a patience that no ordinary explanation could ever fully satisfy. The following morning, Daniel Carter returns to the same trail much earlier than usual, arriving before the sun has fully climbed above the eastern ridge. A cool layer of mountain mist hangs between the towering pines, while tiny drops of dew shimmer across the grass surrounding the old ranger station. The forest awakens slowly. Songbirds greet the new day from hidden branches, and a gentle breeze carries the fresh scent of cedar, damp leaves, and clean mountain air. Daniel quietly follows the familiar gravel path, unsure whether the German shepherd will truly appear again. Part of him expects the previous morning to have been nothing more than a coincidence. Yet as the abandoned building gradually comes into view through the mist, he immediately sees the same strong silhouette resting before the weathered wooden door. The dog has already arrived. He sits with perfect posture facing the entrance exactly as he did the day before, calm, and completely focused. Daniel cannot help but smile. He checks his watch. The time is almost identical to yesterday. Without making unnecessary noise, he walks toward the old porch carrying a small container of fresh water and a package of cooked chicken prepared before leaving home. The German Shepherd glances toward him briefly, acknowledging his presence with quiet awareness before returning his attention to the locked door. Daniel gently places the food several feet away, careful not to pressure the dog. "You really do keep your schedule," he says softly. The dog waits several moments before calmly walking over to eat only a few small pieces. He drinks from the fresh water, then immediately returns to his place before the entrance without hesitation. Daniel watches every movement carefully. This is not the behavior of a stray searching for food. Every action seems measured, almost ceremonial, as though eating is simply a brief interruption to a far more important responsibility. Curious, Daniel settles onto an old wooden bench across the clearing where he can observe without disturbing the quiet routine. Nearly an hour passes. Hikers begin appearing along the nearby trail. Most wave kindly toward the German Shepherd as they pass. A middle-aged couple leaves another bowl of water beside the porch. An elderly woman quietly places homemade dog biscuits near the stone steps before continuing her walk. Nobody appears surprised by the dog's presence. Eventually, Daniel approaches the woman as she returns from her hike. "Has he been coming here long?" he asks. She smiles gently before looking toward the silent German Shepherd. "Longer than I have been hiking these mountains." She replies, "Every single day? Rain, snow, holidays, it never matters. He always comes back." Daniel glances once more toward the old station. "Does anyone know why?" The woman slowly shakes her head. "People have guesses. Some say he belonged to a ranger. Others think someone abandoned him here years ago. Nobody really knows. But everyone around here respects his waiting." After she leaves, Daniel remains seated while the morning slowly turns into afternoon. The sun climbs higher above the forest canopy, filling the clearing with warm golden light. Shadows drift across the porch as hours quietly pass, yet the German Shepherd never abandons his watch. Occasionally he stands, stretches his powerful legs, slowly circles the front steps once, then calmly returns to the exact same position facing the door. As daylight begins softening toward evening, Daniel notices something unexpected. Just before sunset, the German Shepherd finally rises without hesitation. He walks to the edge of the forest, pauses briefly to look back at the locked ranger station one final time, then disappears silently between the towering pines. Daniel remains standing in the quiet clearing long after the dog has vanished from sight. The abandoned building suddenly feels even more mysterious than before, because he realizes he has not witnessed an animal following instinct. He has witnessed someone faithfully keeping an appointment that nobody else remembers. Daniel Carter cannot stop thinking about the German Shepherd after leaving the mountains that evening. Long after returning to his small cabin, while a gentle rain taps softly against the windows and the scent of fresh coffee fills the quiet room, the image of the loyal dog sitting before the abandoned ranger station continues to linger in his thoughts. It reminds him of something deeply familiar. During his years of military service, he had known people who kept difficult promises simply because giving up was never an option. The same quiet determination now lives inside the patient animal waiting beneath the old pine trees. Early the next morning, instead of heading directly back to the trail, Daniel drives into the nearby mountain town. It is a peaceful community where everyone seems to know one another. Small shops line the main street, flower baskets hang beneath old-fashioned streetlights, and the local diner still serves breakfast to generations of families who have lived there for decades. Daniel begins asking simple questions without expecting very much. At the sporting goods store, one employee smiles knowingly the moment he mentions the German Shepherd. At the bakery, an older couple says they often bake plain biscuits specifically to leave near the ranger station. Even the young cashier at the grocery store immediately recognizes the description. The remarkable part is not that everyone has seen the dog. The remarkable part is that everyone speaks about him with quiet respect, almost as though discussing an old friend instead of a stray animal. Finally, Daniel visits the small historical museum located inside the town's original municipal building. Shelves filled with photographs, handwritten journals, ranger uniforms, and faded maps preserve decades of local history. Behind the front desk sits an elderly volunteer named Margaret Ellis, whose gentle smile suggests she has answered countless questions about the mountains over the years. When Daniel quietly mentions the abandoned forest ranger station, her expression changes ever so slightly. She removes her reading glasses and studies him carefully before asking, "You have seen the dog, have you not?" Daniel nods. "Twice now." Margaret slowly walks toward a nearby filing cabinet and carefully removes an old photograph protected inside a clear archival sleeve. She places it upon the wooden table between them. Daniel immediately recognizes the building. The ranger station looks almost new, its green paint still bright beneath a clear summer sky. Several forest rangers stand proudly together wearing matching uniforms. Beside one of them sits a young German shepherd with alert ears and intelligent eyes. Although much younger, the markings across the dog's face appear strikingly familiar. Daniel leans closer without speaking. Margaret gently smiles. "Many people believe that is the same dog," she says quietly. "Or perhaps his father. Nobody has ever been able to prove it." Daniel studies the photograph for several long moments. The ranger kneeling beside the young dog rests one hand gently upon his shoulders. Their expressions reflect complete trust, the kind built through years of working together beneath open skies and towering forests. "What happened here?" Daniel finally asks. Margaret looks toward the rain-covered windows before answering. "The station closed several years ago after budget changes and staff retirements. Records were transferred elsewhere. The building was locked. Life simply moved on." She pauses briefly before adding one final sentence. "Everyone moved on except the dog." Daniel carefully returns the photograph to her hands, but something inside him quietly changes. For the first time, he no longer sees a mystery waiting outside an abandoned building. He sees the beginning of a story that someone forgot to finish, and deep within his heart, he realizes he cannot walk away until he discovers why the faithful German shepherd still believes that one locked door is worth waiting for every single day. The following morning, Daniel Carter reaches the old ranger station before sunrise, carrying only a thermos of hot coffee, a small folding chair, and the quiet determination to understand what no one else had been able to explain. Thin ribbons of fog drift between the towering pines, while the first pale light slowly brushes across the weathered roof of the abandoned building. The clearing remains silent except for distant birds greeting another mountain morning. Just as the clock on Daniel's wrist reaches the same familiar time, movement appears at the edge of the forest. The German shepherd steps calmly from the shadows exactly as he has every day, his powerful stride steady, his amber eyes focused on the station long before he reaches it. Daniel watches without speaking. The dog never hesitates. He walks directly to the front porch, sits before the locked wooden door, and quietly begins another day of waiting. This time Daniel remains beside him instead of watching from a distance. He unfolds the small chair several feet away, pours himself a cup of coffee, and simply shares. The silence. Minutes become hours. The mountain air gradually warms beneath the autumn sun, while soft breezes carry the scent of cedar, wild sage, and fallen pine needles through the clearing. The German shepherd barely moves except to lift his ears whenever the wind shifts across the old building. His attention never wanders far from the entrance. Daniel studies every detail. The faded leather collar still rests comfortably around the dog's neck. Tiny scratches mark the worn brass buckle, suggesting many years of faithful use. The dog's thick coat remains surprisingly clean despite spending every day outdoors, as though someone had cared for him with great devotion long before this lonely routine began. Around midday, a forest maintenance truck slowly passes along the nearby gravel road. The driver lowers his window, smiles toward Daniel, and calls out, "Looks like he finally has company." Daniel walks over while the German shepherd continues facing the station. The driver introduces himself as Eric Morrison, a maintenance supervisor who occasionally checks nearby trails. Daniel asks whether anyone has ever tried taking the dog somewhere safer. Eric nods with a thoughtful expression. Several families offered. Rangers tried years ago. Even the local shelter wanted to help. Every single time, he found his way back here before sunrise the next morning. Daniel glances toward the quiet dog. Does he have a name? Eric smiles gently. Most people around town call him Ranger now. Nobody knows if that was ever his real name, but somehow it fits. The name feels strangely perfect. Daniel quietly repeats it beneath his breath while looking toward the patient German shepherd. Ranger. The dog's ears twitch ever so slightly, but he never turns away from the door. Daniel cannot help smiling. Something about hearing the name spoken aloud makes the silent routine feel deeply personal rather than mysterious. Throughout the afternoon, Daniel notices another remarkable detail. Every few hours, Ranger slowly rises, walks to one specific window beside the entrance, pauses there for several long moments, then calmly returns to his place before the door. He repeats the same path, with careful precision each time, never choosing another window, never wandering elsewhere around the building. It resembles a habit practiced so many times that it has become part of his memory. As golden evening light begins filtering through the towering trees, Daniel quietly walks to the weathered window after Ranger returns to the porch. Dust covers the old glass, making it difficult to see inside, but after shielding his eyes from the fading sunlight, he notices the faint outline of a wooden desk standing exactly opposite the window. Resting upon that desk appears to be something rectangular hidden beneath years of dust. Daniel cannot identify what it is, yet before he can study it longer, Ranger gently stands beside him and looks toward the same window with calm, unwavering eyes. In that silent moment, Daniel no longer believes the faithful dog is simply waiting for someone to arrive. He begins to wonder if Ranger has been patiently guarding something inside the abandoned station that the rest of the world has completely forgotten. Daniel Carter leaves the ranger station that evening carrying far more questions than answers. The image of the dusty desk beyond the weathered window refuses to leave his thoughts. Whatever rests inside the abandoned building seems to hold the attention of the loyal German shepherd just as strongly as the locked front door itself. Back at his cabin, Daniel spreads several county maps across his kitchen table beside an old laptop and a notebook filled with observations from the past few days. Outside, a gentle autumn wind brushes through the surrounding pines while the warm glow of a single lamp fills the quiet room. He begins searching public records, local archives, and historical articles about the old forest ranger station. Most documents repeat the same simple facts. The station officially closed several years earlier after administrative restructuring. Equipment had been relocated. Employees transferred or retired. Maintenance responsibilities shifted elsewhere. On paper, everything appears ordinary. Yet something about the official explanation feels incomplete. The next morning, Daniel drives to the county administration office where old property records and historical documents are stored. A friendly clerk named Susan Harper patiently helps him search through archived files that have not been opened in years. Dust rises gently as large storage boxes are carefully placed upon a wooden research table beneath bright reading lamps. Most folders contain maintenance reports, trail maps, inspection schedules, and routine correspondence. Hours pass quietly before Susan pauses while opening one weathered file marked with the ranger station's original identification number. Inside rests a collection of photographs taken during community events held many years earlier. Daniel slowly studies each image. Families gather outside the station during annual forest education programs. Children proudly plant young pine trees beside smiling rangers. Volunteers repair hiking trails together beneath bright summer skies. Then one photograph immediately captures his attention. Standing near the entrance is the same ranger he had seen in the museum photograph, his arm resting gently across the shoulders of a young German shepherd whose alert ears and distinctive facial markings appear unmistakably familiar. Daniel carefully turns the picture over. Written neatly across the back are several fading words. Senior Ranger Michael Dawson and Ranger after the annual Junior Forest Day. Daniel quietly repeats the names to himself. At last, the loyal dog has an identity beyond local rumors. Ranger. The name had always belonged to him. Susan notices Daniel's expression and gently smiles. Michael Dawson was well respected around here, she says softly. People still speak highly of him. Daniel asks whether she knows what happened after the station closed. Susan slowly shakes her head. Only bits and pieces. I remember hearing he retired earlier than expected. After that, records become surprisingly limited. Before leaving, Daniel requests permission to copy several non-restricted historical photographs for personal research. As Susan prepares the copies, she notices another envelope tucked inside the same archive box. It contains handwritten visitor logs from community events held at the station years before. Its closure. Daniel flips carefully through the pages filled with cheerful signatures and thankful messages from families who had explored the forest under Ranger Michael Dawson's guidance. Near the final pages, he notices Michael's familiar signature repeated beside maintenance notes written in careful handwriting. The final entry simply reads, "Everything is ready. Tomorrow should be another beautiful day in the forest." There are no entries after that sentence. No explanation follows. No farewell appears. The journal simply ends. Daniel quietly closes the folder, feeling an unexpected stillness settle over the room. Outside the office window, afternoon sunlight filters through rows of golden maple trees, reminding him of the peaceful clearing where Ranger continues waiting without fail. For the first time, Daniel begins to believe the faithful German shepherd is not waiting because he cannot let go of the past. He is waiting because somewhere beyond those locked wooden walls, the final chapter of Michael Dawson's story was never allowed to be written. The next morning arrives wrapped in a quiet blanket of silver mist that settles gently across the mountains. Daniel Carter parks beside the familiar trail before sunrise, carrying a small backpack filled with coffee, sandwiches, copies of the old photographs, and a notebook that has quickly become far thicker than he expected. As he follows the winding path beneath towering pine and cedar trees, the forest greets him with its familiar chorus of distant birds, rustling branches, and the soft murmur of a nearby creek flowing over smooth stones. When the abandoned ranger station appears through the morning fog, Ranger is already there, sitting faithfully before the weathered wooden door exactly as always. Daniel smiles with quiet relief. Somehow seeing the German shepherd waiting there has become part of his own daily routine as well. "Good morning, Ranger," he says softly. The dog turns toward him for only a brief moment before returning his gaze to the old entrance. Daniel places fresh water beside the porch and quietly sits nearby. This morning feels different. Instead of searching for clues, he simply watches. The loyal animal with new understanding. He now knows the dog's name. He knows there was once a man named Michael Dawson. He knows the station had once been full of life instead of silence. Yet one question continues growing inside him. Why had Ranger never stopped coming after everyone else moved on? Shortly before noon, another visitor slowly walks into the clearing. He is an elderly man wearing a faded Forest Service jacket and carrying a polished wooden walking stick. His silver hair catches the sunlight, while years of mountain life show gently across his weathered face. The moment Ranger notices him, the German shepherd calmly stands and slowly walks forward with quiet recognition. The elderly man kneels carefully despite his age and smiles warmly as he strokes the dog's neck. "Hello, old friend," he whispers. Daniel immediately realizes they have known each other for years. After introducing himself, the elderly man explains that his name is Thomas Granger, a retired forest ranger who worked alongside Michael Dawson for nearly 2 decades. Daniel carefully shares everything he has learned over the past several days. Thomas listens patiently before looking toward the old station with thoughtful eyes. "Michael loved these mountains more than anywhere else," he says quietly. "But if there was one thing he loved even more, it was that dog." Ranger calmly returns to his place before the porch while Thomas continues speaking. People often believed Michael trained Ranger to track trails or locate lost hikers. He certainly could do those things. But what made him special was not his training. It was his loyalty. Every morning, Michael unlocked that front door at exactly the same time. Ranger always waited outside until Michael invited him in. It became their tradition for years. Daniel quietly pictures the same routine repeating season after season beneath these very trees. Thomas smiles gently at the memory. Michael used to tell everyone that respect begins with simple habits. Ranger never entered without permission, even when nobody else was watching. Daniel studies the locked door once more. Suddenly, the daily ritual no longer appears mysterious. It feels heartbreakingly familiar. The German shepherd is still honoring the routine that shaped his entire life. Thomas slowly removes an old photograph from his jacket pocket. It shows Michael standing beside Ranger in front of the station, both looking toward the camera with easy smiles beneath a bright summer sky. Along the bottom, Michael had written a single sentence in careful handwriting. "Some friendships become part of the forest forever." Daniel holds the faded photograph gently while cool mountain wind moves through the clearing. Ranger remains seated before the entrance with patient confidence, never demanding answers, never losing hope. In that peaceful silence, Daniel realizes that loyalty is not measured by the number of years someone waits. It is measured by the quiet faith that one meaningful promise is always worth keeping, even when the rest of the world has forgotten why. The conversation with Thomas Granger stays with Daniel Carter long after the elderly ranger quietly leaves the mountain clearing. As the afternoon sun slowly drifts across the weathered porch, Daniel finds himself looking at the old station with different eyes. The building no longer appears abandoned. Instead, it feels paused, as though time itself had been patiently waiting beside Ranger for someone willing to finish an unfinished story. Before leaving, Thomas had quietly mentioned one final detail that Daniel cannot forget. The station still belongs to the State Forestry Department. Although it has remained closed for years, it has never been permanently decommissioned. That simple fact plants a new possibility inside Daniel's mind. Early the following morning, he drives to the regional forestry office located nearly 50 miles away. The modern administrative building feels very different from the quiet mountain station. Computers replace handwritten journals, bright fluorescent lights replace warm morning sunlight, and busy hallways replace whispering pine trees. Daniel patiently explains everything he has witnessed over the past week. At first, the officials politely listen without showing much emotion. An abandoned ranger station and a loyal dog hardly seem urgent compared to the daily responsibilities of managing thousands of acres of protected forest. Yet Daniel calmly places the old photographs upon the conference table. He shares copies of the visitor logs, Michael Dawson's final journal entry, and the photograph Thomas had shown him. Most importantly, he describes Ranger's unwavering routine with careful honesty, never exaggerating, never asking for sympathy. The room gradually grows quiet. One supervisor finally leans forward and studies the photograph of Michael standing beside the young German shepherd. "I remember hearing his name when I first joined the department," she says thoughtfully. Another administrator opens archived property records on a computer screen and confirms that the building remains officially secured rather than condemned. Daniel politely asks a single question. Would it be possible to reopen the station for one inspection? The request hangs quietly in the room. Regulations require planning, documentation, and safety procedures before anyone enters a long-closed public building. Nobody can simply unlock the door because of a remarkable story, no matter how moving it may be. Daniel understands completely. He thanks everyone for listening and prepares to leave without disappointment. Just as he reaches the hallway, the supervisor gently calls his name. She explains that an annual structural inspection is already scheduled for the following week. With proper authorization, Daniel may accompany the inspection team as an invited historical volunteer because of the research he has collected regarding the station's community history. Daniel feels his heartbeat quicken, though he remains outwardly calm. He signs the necessary paperwork with steady hands before quietly driving back toward the mountains. The following days pass slowly. Every morning, Daniel still visits Ranger before sunrise. Nothing changes in the loyal dog's routine. He arrives exactly on time, waits before the weathered wooden door, briefly walks to the same dusty window, then returns to his place on the porch with patient dignity. Daniel never mentions the upcoming inspection because there are no words capable of explaining hope to someone who has already spent years proving it. Finally, the long-awaited morning arrives. A crisp autumn breeze carries golden leaves across the gravel road as two forestry vehicles slowly enter the clearing. Uniformed inspectors step out carrying clipboards, equipment cases, and one carefully protected ring of old keys retrieved from state archives. Ranger immediately stands. His ears lift toward the familiar sound of approaching footsteps. Daniel quietly walks beside him without speaking. The lead inspector approaches the weathered entrance and studies the faded lock that has remained untouched for so many seasons. She selects an old brass key from the ring, gently slides it into the lock, and pauses for one respectful moment before turning it. The mechanism resists at first, then releases with a soft metallic click that echoes through the silent forest. Ranger does not rush forward. He simply remains standing before the door, watching with calm, unwavering eyes, as though he has always known this day would finally arrive. The heavy wooden door slowly swings inward with a long, gentle creak that seems to awaken years of quiet memories resting inside the old ranger station. Dust dances through narrow beams of autumn sunlight streaming across the worn wooden floor, while the fresh scent of cedar and aged pine fills the cool mountain air. Every person standing on the porch remains silent. Even the forest itself seems to pause. Ranger does not rush inside. Instead, he waits patiently beside the entrance exactly as he had done countless mornings before. The lead inspector quietly steps aside and nods toward him with a warm smile. "Go ahead, old friend." Only then does the German Shepherd take his first careful step across the threshold. His movements are slow, respectful, and completely certain, as though every board beneath his paws is already familiar. Daniel Carter follows several feet behind while the inspection team begins documenting the building. Inside, time appears to have stopped. Shelves still hold neatly arranged field guides about local wildlife. Hand-drawn trail maps remain pinned to a large bulletin board, their edges curled with age. A cast-iron coffee pot rests quietly upon the old stove. Several wooden chairs surround a long meeting table covered by a thin layer of dust, yet nothing appears abandoned in spirit. It feels as though everyone simply stepped outside for a short walk and never returned. Ranger quietly walks through the main room without hesitation. He pauses beside each familiar place for only a few seconds before continuing onward. His nose gently touches the corner of an old wooden chair. He briefly stands beside a stone fireplace where faded family photographs still decorate the mantel. Then he slowly approaches the very desk Daniel had noticed through the dusty window days earlier. The German Shepherd sits calmly beside it and looks upward without making a sound. Daniel carefully steps closer. The desk itself is remarkably well preserved beneath years of dust. Resting neatly at its center lies a weathered leather journal, exactly where someone had left it long ago. Beside it rests an old ranger hat, a brass compass, and a framed photograph showing Michael Dawson smiling beside a much younger ranger beneath bright summer skies. Daniel gently removes his gloves before lifting the journal with both hands. Dust slowly drifts into the warm sunlight as he opens the worn cover. The first several pages contain routine trail reports, wildlife observations, and maintenance notes written in Michael's careful handwriting. Every sentence reflects patience, kindness, and deep respect for the mountains he protected. Ranger remains quietly seated beside the desk, watching Daniel with calm eyes while his tail rests motionless across the wooden floor. The inspectors continue their work respectfully in other rooms, careful not to interrupt the deeply personal moment unfolding before them. Daniel slowly turns another page. Folded neatly between two journal entries rests a sealed envelope bearing only a few handwritten words across the front. "For whoever opens this station one day." Daniel's hands become perfectly still. The paper has yellowed with age, yet the handwriting remains remarkably clear. He glances toward Ranger, who continues sitting peacefully beside the desk exactly where Michael had once worked. The loyal German Shepherd lowers his head slightly, almost as though he recognizes the envelope waiting where it has always belonged. Daniel gently holds the letter without opening it immediately. Somehow the moment feels too meaningful to rush. Outside, soft mountain wind moves through the towering pines while warm afternoon light slowly fills the old station with quiet golden color. After years of faithful waiting, after countless mornings spent before a locked door that nobody else understood, Ranger has finally returned to the place his heart never abandoned. Daniel realizes that the remarkable journey was never about discovering a forgotten building. It was about arriving at the exact moment when one faithful promise had finally found the person ready to receive it. Daniel Carter holds the weathered envelope with both hands while the quiet room remains wrapped in respectful silence. Dust floats gently through warm afternoon light pouring across the old ranger station, illuminating every worn wooden surface with a soft golden glow. The inspectors continue their careful work in distant rooms, their footsteps muted against old floorboards, allowing this deeply personal moment to unfold undisturbed. Ranger remains seated beside Michael Dawson's desk exactly where he had stopped only moments earlier. His calm amber eyes rest upon the envelope without impatience, as though he has already waited long enough and understands that some words deserve to arrive slowly. Daniel gently breaks the aged seal and unfolds the carefully preserved letter. The handwriting is steady, thoughtful, and unmistakably personal. "If you are reading this," Michael begins, "then this station has finally opened again. Perhaps many years have passed. Perhaps only a few. Either way, thank you for caring enough to step inside." Daniel quietly continues reading while the room seems to grow even more peaceful around him. Michael explains that the ranger station was never simply a workplace. It had always been a gathering place where families learned to respect the forest, children discovered wildlife for the first time, volunteers became lifelong friends, and every visitor left knowing the mountains belonged to everyone willing to protect them. He writes that Ranger had never been trained only to follow commands. Instead, he had been raised to greet every visitor with patience, kindness, and quiet confidence because trust always begins before words are spoken. Daniel smiles softly while glancing toward the faithful German shepherd resting beside the desk. The letter continues. Michael explains that retirement had arrived sooner than expected because of changing responsibilities within the department. He had hoped the station would reopen quickly under new leadership, but circumstances changed faster than anyone anticipated. Before locking the building for what everyone believed would be only a temporary closure, Michael followed the same morning routine one final time. He unlocked the front door. Ranger waited outside until invited inside. They completed their daily inspection together. Then Michael gently placed one hand upon Ranger's shoulders and quietly promised, "One day someone will unlock this door again. When that day comes, I hope you will be here to welcome them home." Daniel pauses reading for a moment as emotion quietly settles across the room. Ranger remains perfectly still, breathing slowly beside the desk with peaceful eyes that seem to carry years of faithful remembrance. Michael's final paragraphs are written not with sadness, but with remarkable hope. "If Ranger is somehow still here," the letter reads, "please tell him he kept every promise better than I ever could. Tell him this place never belonged to one Ranger. It belongs to everyone who chooses kindness over comfort, patience over frustration, and service over recognition. If the station lives again, let it become a place where people remember that loyalty is not measured by how loudly it announces itself, but by how quietly it stays when nobody is watching." Daniel lowers the letter and gently closes his eyes for a brief moment. The words feel less like a farewell and more like an invitation waiting patiently across the years. He carefully folds the letter exactly as he found it before placing it back inside the envelope. Then he kneels beside Ranger and rests one hand upon the loyal German shepherd's shoulders. The dog slowly lifts his head and meets Daniel's eyes for the first time since entering the station. No excitement fills the room. No dramatic celebration follows. Only quiet understanding passes between them. Outside, mountain wind moves gently through the towering pines, while sunlight fills every corner of the old ranger station. Daniel realizes that the locked door had never been protecting forgotten memories from the world. It had been patiently protecting a promise until the right heart arrived to understand why one faithful dog had never stopped believing someone would eventually come back. The inspection team finishes documenting the old ranger station just before sunset, yet nobody seems eager to leave. The building no longer feels like an abandoned structure hidden deep within the forest. Instead, it feels like a place that has quietly awakened after years of patient silence. Warm golden light pours through every window, illuminating shelves of weathered field guides, carefully folded trail maps, polished lanterns, and wooden furniture that had faithfully waited through countless changing seasons. Daniel Carter carefully returns Michael Dawson's letter to the desk drawer where it had rested for so many years, leaving everything exactly as it had been found except for one small difference. The words have finally been read by someone willing to understand them. Ranger remains beside the desk for several more minutes before slowly standing and walking toward the front entrance. Daniel follows quietly, expecting the loyal German shepherd to return to his familiar place outside the door. Instead, Ranger pauses beside the old wooden chair positioned near the front window where generations of visitors once waited to speak with the station's ranger. The German shepherd gently lowers himself onto the floor beside the chair, resting his head calmly against its worn wooden leg. Daniel immediately recognizes the place. It is not simply another corner of the room. It is the exact chair visible beside Michael Dawson in several of the old photographs. Thomas Granger had once mentioned that every morning Michael welcomed hikers from that chair before beginning the day's work. Granger had likely spent countless hours resting beside it, quietly watching people arrive with questions, stories, and hopes for safe journeys through the mountains. Daniel kneels nearby without interrupting the peaceful moment. The dog does not appear sad. His breathing remains slow and relaxed. His eyes quietly study the chair as though greeting an old friend rather than mourning someone who is gone. One of the forestry supervisors approaches Daniel and speaks softly to avoid disturbing the calm atmosphere. She explains that after seeing the historical materials and reading Michael's preserved records, the department has decided to recommend restoring the ranger station instead of leaving it closed indefinitely. It could once again become a small visitor center dedicated to forest education, local history, and conservation. Daniel looks around the quiet room with gratitude. The shelves, the maps, the old fireplace, the journals, and even the familiar wooden chair suddenly seem filled with new purpose rather than fading memories. Outside, evening sunlight stretches long golden shadows across the clearing while cool mountain air drifts gently through the open doorway. For the first time in many years, fresh air moves freely through every room of the station. Ranger slowly rises from beside the chair and calmly walks toward the entrance. Daniel instinctively follows. Together they step outside onto the weathered porch where countless mornings had quietly begun. The familiar clearing glows beneath the warm colors of the setting sun. Pine trees sway gently above the gravel path while birds settle into the forest canopy for the evening. Daniel quietly watches Ranger turn toward the front door. For several long seconds, the loyal German shepherd simply stands there, looking at the entrance that had defined so much of his life. Then something unexpected happens. Instead of lowering himself into his familiar waiting position before the threshold, Ranger calmly turns away from the door and walks toward Daniel. Without hesitation, he sits beside the veteran rather than facing the building. Daniel smiles as he gently places one hand upon the dog's shoulders. Nothing is spoken between them because no explanation is necessary. Ranger is no longer waiting for someone to return. The promise that had quietly guided every sunrise had finally reached its destination. As the last light of day settles across the peaceful mountains, Daniel realizes that true loyalty does not end when a door finally opens. It gently becomes the foundation upon which a new beginning is built. Over the following weeks, the quiet mountain clearing slowly begins changing in ways that feel almost impossible to anyone who had watched the old ranger station fade into silence. The forestry department approves the restoration plan, not to transform the building into something modern, but to preserve everything that had made it meaningful in the first place. Volunteers from the nearby town arrive carrying paintbrushes, lumber, flower boxes, and cleaning supplies. Retired rangers return with stories that had not been shared in years. Families who once attended nature programs bring faded photographs and handwritten memories to contribute to a growing historical collection. Daniel Carter finds himself visiting almost every morning, working alongside people who had never met one another before yet somehow seemed connected by the same quiet purpose. Ranger walks calmly among them, never asking for attention, never becoming the center of the activity, yet somehow encouraging everyone simply by being present. Children who had only heard stories about the faithful German shepherd kneel to gently stroke his thick black and tan coat. Ranger greets each child with the same patient kindness that Michael Dawson had once described in his letter. The old station gradually begins breathing again. Fresh green paint carefully matches the original color preserved beneath the porch roof. The weathered wooden sign is restored instead of replaced. Trail maps are framed behind protective glass. Michael's ranger hat remains displayed beside his journal exactly where Daniel discovered it, while the folded letter is preserved inside a climate-controlled display accompanied by a simple plaque explaining that loyalty sometimes leaves its greatest lessons in silence. Daniel spends long afternoons organizing historical photographs donated by local families. One by one, smiling faces return to the walls. School groups planting young trees. Volunteer trail crews clearing mountain paths. Children proudly holding small nature journals beside Michael and Ranger. Each photograph quietly proves that the station had never been important because of the building itself. It had always been important because it brought people together. One crisp Saturday morning, the restored station welcomes its first visitors. The ribbon across the front entrance is modest, and no large celebration has been planned. The community chooses something much simpler. As the first families arrive, Thomas Granger stands beside Daniel beneath the old flagpole, while the mountain breeze gently lifts a newly raised American flag into the clear blue sky. The familiar sound of fabric moving softly in the wind seems to awaken memories that belong to everyone present. Ranger sits peacefully beside the entrance, watching children step carefully through the doorway, just as hikers once did many years before. Daniel notices something remarkable. The German shepherd no longer stares at the front door with endless expectation. Instead, he calmly watches each visitor with quiet curiosity, occasionally standing to greet them before returning to his comfortable place beneath the front window. It is the very role Michael had hoped he would continue one day. A young boy quietly asks Daniel whether Ranger still waits every morning. Daniel smiles while looking toward the faithful dog. "Not anymore," he answers gently. Now he welcomes people instead. The simple reply seems to carry far more meaning than the child can fully understand. Yet the boy smiles anyway before carefully offering Ranger a gentle scratch behind the ears. The German shepherd accepts the affection with peaceful contentment before turning his attention toward another family walking up the trail. As warm afternoon sunlight fills the restored Ranger station with laughter, conversation, and the familiar scent of fresh coffee drifting from the old cast iron stove once again, Daniel realizes that promises do not truly end when they are fulfilled. The finest promises quietly become traditions, and traditions become places where future generations discover that loyalty, kindness, and hope never disappear as long as someone is willing to open the door for another soul. As autumn slowly gives way to early winter, the restored Ranger station settles into a peaceful rhythm that feels as natural as the changing seasons surrounding it. Frost sparkles across the mountain meadows each morning while soft clouds drift between towering pine trees, and warm light glows once again from the station windows before sunrise. Daniel Carter has quietly become part of the daily routine, arriving early to prepare fresh coffee, straighten trail maps, greet volunteers, and open the front door just as Michael Dawson once did. It is never announced as a ceremony, yet everyone who visits notices the same gentle tradition. Each morning, Daniel unlocks the weathered wooden door, steps back with a quiet smile, and waits. Ranger calmly approaches the entrance, pauses for a brief moment exactly as he has done throughout his life, then walks inside with quiet confidence. The simple routine never fails to bring a smile to those fortunate enough to witness it. It is no longer an act of waiting. It has become an act of remembrance. School groups begin visiting regularly, filling the station with curious questions, bright laughter, and eager footsteps across the polished wooden floor. Children gather around the restored fireplace while retired rangers share stories about wildlife, conservation, and the people who devoted their lives to protecting the mountains. Ranger patiently lies nearby, occasionally lifting his head whenever a child quietly approaches to stroke his thick coat. His calm presence somehow teaches lessons that words alone never could. One afternoon, a young girl notices the framed photograph of Michael Dawson beside the younger German shepherd displayed above the old desk. She looks toward Ranger, then quietly asks Daniel, "Is that really him?" Daniel studies the photograph before smiling warmly. "Yes," he answers. "Many years ago." The little girl looks back at Ranger with wide eyes filled with admiration. "He remembered all this time?" Daniel gently nods. He remembered because someone once showed him that promises matter. The child thinks quietly for several seconds before placing a small pine cone she had collected along the trail beside the framed photograph. She whispers a soft thank you before rejoining her classmates. Daniel watches the simple gesture with quiet gratitude, realizing that kindness often continues through the smallest actions. As daylight slowly fades that evening, the last visitors begin making their way down the mountain trail. Volunteers finish sweeping the porch while the smell of cedar and fresh coffee still lingers inside the station. Daniel closes the visitor journal after reading one final message left by a family from another state. "Thank you for reminding us that loyalty can outlive silence." He gently sets the journal upon Michael's restored desk beside the preserved letter, and old brass compass. Ranger slowly walks through each familiar room before returning to the front entrance. Daniel instinctively expects him to stop beside the door as he once did every evening. Yet the faithful German shepherd calmly continues walking past the porch and toward the nearby trail instead. After several steps he pauses, turns back, and quietly waits. Daniel smiles, switches off the lights, carefully locks the station for the evening, and slips the old brass key into his pocket. Then he walks toward Ranger together with the peaceful confidence of two companions who no longer carry unfinished promises between them. Side by side, they begin the gentle hike beneath towering evergreens while the first evening stars appear above the mountain ridges. Behind them, the Ranger station stands warm, cared for, and filled once again with purpose. Ahead of them stretches the familiar forest trail, no longer leading toward unanswered questions, but toward another ordinary tomorrow made extraordinary simply because hope had finally found a place to call home. Several months pass, and the mountain seasons continue their quiet rhythm just as they always have. Winter snow eventually melts into clear streams rushing across smooth stones, fresh wildflowers bloom beneath towering pines, and warm spring sunlight once again fills the restored Ranger station with gentle life. Every morning begins with the same peaceful tradition. Daniel Carter unlocks the weathered wooden door while cool mountain air drifts through the clearing. He steps aside with a quiet smile, and Ranger pauses respectfully before crossing the threshold exactly as Michael Dawson had taught him years before. Visitors often notice the simple ritual without fully understanding its meaning, yet somehow they always leave smiling. The station has become more than a place where maps are collected or hiking trails begin. It has quietly become a place where people remember that kindness deserves to be practiced, not merely admired. Families return each season with children who are now growing taller. Volunteers gather to maintain forest paths together. Retired rangers share stories beside the old stone fireplace, while fresh coffee fills the room with its familiar comforting aroma. Michael's journal remains carefully preserved upon the restored desk beside his ranger hat, brass compass, and framed photograph. Nearby, the letter rests beneath protective glass where every visitor may quietly read the final promise that changed one faithful dog's life forever. Ranger spends his days exactly where he seems happiest. Sometimes he rests beneath the front window greeting hikers with calm amber eyes. Sometimes he quietly walks beside school groups exploring nearby nature trails. Sometimes he simply lies beside Daniel while children read wildlife books across the wooden floor. He never asks for attention, yet somehow everyone finds themselves smiling when they notice him peacefully watching over the station. One warm afternoon, Daniel discovers a small notebook left inside the visitor journal cabinet. The cover reads, "Lessons we learned here." Curious, he slowly opens the first page. Families, hikers, volunteers, and children have each written a single thought after visiting the station. Patience is stronger than hurry. Kindness always finds its way home. The best guide sometimes has 4 paws. Promises matter. Hope waits longer than fear. Daniel quietly turns each page while sunlight dances across the polished wooden floor. None of the visitors had known one another, yet together they had written the same story in different words. He gently places the notebook beside Michael's journal, realizing the station is still teaching people exactly as it always had. That evening, after the last visitors leave and the forest settles beneath the golden colors of sunset, Daniel locks the front door and slips the old brass key into his pocket. Ranger calmly walks beside him toward the familiar trail leading through the towering cedars. Halfway down the path, Daniel pauses at the small wooden bridge crossing the clear mountain stream where he first noticed how peaceful life had become. Ranger stops beside him, looking toward the flowing water while the gentle sound of the creek echoes softly through the quiet valley. Daniel rests one hand upon the faithful German shepherd's shoulders and smiles. "Thank you," he whispers. Not because the mystery has been solved, not because the station has reopened, but because one loyal friend quietly reminded him that the greatest journeys are not measured by miles walked or years passed. They are measured by the promises we choose to keep when nobody is watching. Together, they continue down the forest trail beneath the fading light, their footsteps moving with the same quiet rhythm they now share every day. Behind them, The restored ranger station stands peacefully among the towering pines, no longer defined by a locked door, but by the countless hearts welcomed through it. And somewhere beyond the whispering trees, where mountain winds carry old memories into every new season, the quiet spirit of faithful friendship continues walking beside anyone willing to believe that even the smallest act of loyalty can open a door that time itself could never close.